We're continuing in week 4, looking at lessons from the book of Daniel. And of course, we've looked at things in Daniel's life and his character. We've also looked at 1 week at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and their standing firm in the face of their belief, in spite of the fact that there were consequences that they were going to have to pay. So we've kind of looked at it from all aspects, just from the book of Daniel, some things that we can really pull out. And so today is no different. I want to look at chapter 4 specifically. And chapter 4 is really all about pride. It's a lesson in pride. And I tell you, pride will take you down quickly. It will grab hold of you and it will turn you into somebody that maybe you never intended to be. I dare say there are people that have probably, if they could truly be honest, they've looked back at their life and realized the times that pride played such a part in decisions they made, in the way they were represented to other people, and in outcomes that they've lived with maybe for all of their life simply because of pride. I think of people who have been so prideful and hard-headed in not willing to go to someone and seek, the ability to be back in relationship, to ask forgiveness, to reconcile things that can be reconciled. I know there are always situations that are beyond that. If both parties aren't willing, I understand all that. But I know so many people who have let relationships just fall by the wayside when they could have been reconciled and made to be something beautiful had they just not been so hard-headed and filled with pride to go to them and humble themselves and just say, I'm sorry for where we are. Can we start over? Can we have a fresh start? And so pride can just really take us down. It can ruin relationships. There's a level of pride that we can have pride in our work. We can do something well. The Bible talks about doing everything we do unto the Lord and for the glory of the Lord. And so we can set out to do things with an amount of pride in what we do. That kind of pride can be a good pride. It can be the thing that we do the best job we can. We do it for the Lord. And when we're done, we walk away and say, okay, I'm proud of what I accomplished here. There's nothing wrong with that type of pride. But even that pride, when it's taken too far, we get that pride and it starts becoming self-focused on, I'm so proud of what I did. I'm so proud of how smart I am, how good of a job I did. Then that's when pride swings the other way and it becomes focused on us instead of focused on the abilities that God has given us and gifted us with. So pride is a powerful thing, and only by the grace of God will we overcome it in our life. And He can surely, and I know and I've seen it happen, He's done it in my life in areas that pride was trying to raise its head, and He has done it where He's come in and softened my heart and brought that to my mind. And I've been able to put that at His feet and say, Lord, forgive me. I'm sorry for being prideful in that way. So Daniel chapter 4 is very much a picture of pride. Now, what we know in Daniel chapter 3, the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego has just happened. And at the end of chapter 3, the king has been so grateful that, wow, there's a fourth man in the fire. It looks like the Son of God. He's had this amazing revelation and this moment. And at the end of chapter 4, which is what we're going to look at today, at the very end of this chapter, King Nebuchadnezzar makes an amazing statement. He says this at the very end of chapter 4. He said, those who walk in pride will be put down. Now, it is great that the king came to this understanding, but getting to that point, the story that we read in chapter 4 was quite the journey for him to be able to get to the place where he was able to say, those who walk in pride will be put down. This whole chapter in chapter 4 is really a letter from King Nebuchadnezzar to all of the people. It says that to us in verse 1. And for just a few minutes in the first few verses of the chapter, Nebuchadnezzar is almost sounding a little bit like a believer. Like he's come around to believe a few things about this God, because it says in chapter 4, verses 2 and 3, the king said, I thought it good to declare the signs and wonders that the Most High God has worked for me. So he's writing this letter, he's presenting this information to the people, and he's saying, I thought it was good if I would present the signs and the wonders that the Most High God has worked for me. And then he says, how great are His signs and how mighty His wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and His dominion is from generation to generation. He's just kind of sounding almost like he's a believer. He's starting to come around to the understanding of this God of Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. If you remember, he's just gone through this fiasco with building, this statue for everyone to worship. And now in verse 4, we see what happens. And let's read on. It says in verses 4 through 6, he says, I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in my house, and I was flourishing in my palace. I saw a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts on my bed and the visions of my head troubled me. Therefore I issued a decree to bring in all the wise men of Babylon before me, that they might make known to me the interpretation of the dream. So the king has this dream, and he proceeds to bring in all the people like he always did to share this dream and to see what the interpretation might be. Daniel comes before the king, and the king proceeds to share this vision with Daniel. And basically, in a nutshell, the dream is this. He saw a large tree that covered the earth, and its leaves and its fruit were abundant, and there was food for all. And the beasts, the animals, took shelter underneath it. The birds dwelt in the branches of this great tree. All the flesh was fed from this tree. Well, then the Holy One came down from heaven and told them to chop down the tree and to cut off its branches and strip its leaves and scatter the fruit to destroy this tree. But they said, leave the stump and the roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze. And then the dream said, let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let him graze with the beasts of the grass of the earth. Let his heart be changed from that of a man to a beast, and let 7 years pass. So he shares that this is the dream. This is what I saw in my dream. And Daniel replies to the king in chapter 4, verse 19, and he makes this statement. I really think it's a beautiful statement. Then Daniel, it says in 19, whose name was Belteshazzar, was astonished for a time, and his thoughts troubled him. Now, Daniel's standing there going to give the king the interpretation. And as he's hearing this dream, or maybe before he even heard the dream, I don't know the timeline, the Lord was giving Daniel the interpretation. And what the Lord was giving Daniel was thinking, this is going to be a hard word to share with the king. This is not going to be easy. So it said that his thoughts troubled him. So the king spoke and said, Belteshazzar, do not let the dream or its interpretation trouble you. Easy for you to say, you don't know what the interpretation is. I'm telling you what Daniel was thinking. It's just my own little Kathy Wampler commentary. It says, Belteshazzar answered and said, that was Daniel. He said, my Lord, may the dream concern those who hate you, and its interpretation concern your enemies. He was saying to the king, what has just been revealed to me by the Most High God, may it not be that it's about you. May it be that it's about your enemies, because what I'm about to tell you, the dream means you don't want that happening to you, but you would want that to happen to your worst enemy. So, let it be that is really what's going to happen. See, Daniel, I believe, had come to love this king. He didn't love the king's gods. He certainly didn't love everything the king did. He certainly didn't agree with every decision the king made. None of that. But from humanity to humanity, Daniel had come in relationship with this king. He had gained favor with this king. He had grown in this relationship and connection and friendship. I think about people in my life that I love dearly, and they are friends or possibly family. Man, I love them. I would do anything I could to help them. It doesn't mean I agree with everything. It doesn't mean that we see eye to eye on everything. It doesn't mean they live their life the way I live my life. But man, I love them and I care for them. Daniel was no different. He had come to love King Nebuchadnezzar, and he was about to have a very hard word to share with the king. And the boldness that Daniel had to have to speak to his friend, his boss, the king, but his friend this way, to speak with boldness what was going to happen no matter how hard. The Bible tells us in James that our words need to be seasoned with salt and full of grace. And I believe that there are a lot of times there are hard things we have to say to people. I do believe there is almost always, I'm going to put almost there because I'm sure there's cases where what I'm about to say may not be possible, but I believe that almost always it is possible to say the hard things seasoned with salt and full of grace. What does salt do on your food? Have you ever eaten something that didn't taste that great, but you managed to get it down by adding a little extra salt? Kind of like, okay, that was pretty bland, but that salt helps it go down, right? Seasoned with salt and full of grace, that our words are just so filled with the love of Christ that we can say the hard things and our words can be that way. Oh, let us have this gift that Daniel obviously had to be able to share what needed to be shared, even though it was hard. And in Daniel's heart, I know he was longing for the king to make a change in his life. In fact, it says in verse 27, he said, therefore, O king, he gives him the interpretation, and then he says, therefore, O king, let my advice be acceptable to you. Break off your sin by being righteous and your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor. Perhaps there may be a lengthening of your prosperity. He was saying, oh king, if you'll turn from your ways, if you'll change things in your life, if you'll get things right with God right now, he said, maybe that interpretation I just shared with you won't happen for you. Maybe God will be gracious and merciful to you if you right now will respond and change things in your life. Man, I think about people in my life. I feel that way about maybe God will be gracious to you. Come on, change it. Get a perspective that you need to have. Well, the interpretation of this dream was that this tree, he said to the king, he said, the tree is you, O king, and you've grown and you've become strong. And the Holy One that you saw was sharing a decree from the Most High. And that decree is that you're going to be driven out from your men, from your dwelling, and you will dwell in the field and eat the grass like oxen. And he said, 7 years will pass until you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he chooses. Well, after this interpretation of the fact that you're going to lose everything and you're going to be in a field for 7 years eating grass and getting rained on and dew in the morning, just like the animals, you're going to live that way for 7 years. Well, in verse 29 and 31, after hearing this, there's a whole year that passes and nothing changes. King Nebuchadnezzar's like, what? He said that was going to happen. It's been a year, nothing's happened. Isn't that pride? Isn't that what we do? Or isn't that when we get angry at God? Oh, well, somebody gave me that word that God was going to do this. It's been a year, nothing's happened. Well, God isn't faithful to his word. That's what we do because we're looking at things on our timeline, and God has a whole different timeline. In verse 29 through 31, it says this: at the end of the 12 months, this year that nothing had happened, Nebuchadnezzar, he was walking about the palace. The king spoke and he said, is not this great Babylon that I have built for a royal dwelling in my mighty power, for the honor of my majesty? Do you notice I circled in my Bible the I's and the my's because that's pride. King Nebuchadnezzar was looking out at his vast kingdom saying, look at this wonderful kingdom that I have built for my majesty and my glory. And it says, while the word was still in the king's mouth, while he was standing there pridefully taking the credit, while they were in his mouth, it says a voice fell from heaven and said, King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom has departed from you. At that moment, he lost everything. Pride got the best of him. He forgot about, oh, that's been a year. That dream and interpretation must not be happening. Must have just had some bad pizza the night before. And Daniel had an off day, so I don't know what's going on. But look at my beautiful kingdom. Nothing's happened. And at those words, he was cast out into the field, driven out like an animal, and he was beginning to live. He was going to live for 7 years, just like the oxen lived in the field, as he was bragging. After 4 years, in verse 34 through 37, he comes to his senses. And I love this section in the scripture. At the end of time, he said, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my understanding returned to me. That's when pride was beginning to chip away. 7 years, he had plenty of time to think about all of the I's and the me's and the my's that he had said in his life. 7 years of replaying the I's and the me's and the my's in his conversation and in his bragging. He said, and my understanding returned, and I blessed the Most High, and I praised and I honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion. His kingdom is from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing. He does according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. No one can restrain his hand or say to him, what have you done? He goes on in the next verses to say, at that time his reasoning returned to him, and the glory of his kingdom, his honor and splendor returned to him. God began to give him back everything that he lost, because in that moment he lifted his eyes to heaven and he realized where he had gone wrong. He realized where pride had taken him in his life. There's an old song that I reference often because it's so near and dear to my heart. It says, "Turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace." Oh, that we, like Nebuchadnezzar, could turn our eyes to heaven and shift our focus off of ourselves and onto the things, and all of the stuff in life that we struggle with will fade in the light of his glory, that we would no longer seek the fame and the glory of men, that we would truly do what we do for Christ alone, for his glory and what I can do to advance the kingdom. For King Nebuchadnezzar, it took the process of this whole chapter of going through 7 years of living like an animal to get to the place where he could say, what did he say when he started in the chapter? He said, "Those who walk in pride will be put down." May we learn today to live in humility without needing such a stark experience like King Nebuchadnezzar to learn this lesson. And may we say, Lord, help me to keep you in the forefront of my life so that you get all the glory, you get all the honor, you get all the praise. And I'm just here, your willing vessel to be used of you.